Under the scorching sun of a chaotic construction site, Aaron Mitchell, an undercover inspector, faced the wrath of a racist foreman. Tasked with exposing deadly violations, Aaron's quiet defiance triggered a chain of events that revealed deep-seated hate and injustice. What happened next will shock even those who've seen it all. But let's start at the beginning. Aaron Mitchell was a striking figure, not just for his sharp, symmetrical features and well-defined jawline, but for the quiet confidence he carried. His smooth, dark complexion was complemented by a neatly trimmed beard and close-cropped hair that framed his expressive, intelligent eyes. Those eyes, piercing and unwavering, seemed to take in every detail around him. They were the kind of eyes that spoke of a mind always working, observing, and analyzing. Though only 35, Aaron's presence suggested someone much older, someone who had seen enough of the world to recognize both its potential for greatness and its tendency toward injustice. Standing a solid 6 feet tall, Aaron had the physique of a man who valued discipline, broad shoulders, lean muscle, and the kind of posture that exuded self-respect. Dressed in a simple gray button-down shirt and sturdy work boots, he blended into the construction crew seamlessly, but his pressed slacks and spotless safety vest hinted at a purpose that went beyond manual labor. Around his wrist, a well-worn watch, its face scratched from years of use, reminded him of time's relentless march, a reflection, perhaps, of his belief in seizing every moment to make an impact. Aaron's assignment was no ordinary one. As an undercover safety observer for the State Labor Board, he was tasked with exposing dangerous practices and systemic issues at this particular site. Reports of injuries swept under the rug, safety violations ignored, and rampant discrimination had piled up for months. The company in question was large, influential, and notoriously litigious. Aaron knew from the start that his job would not be easy. His presence was a double-edged sword. He could either bring much-needed change or make himself a target in the process. The moment Aaron stepped onto the site, he was enveloped in chaos. The sharp staccato rhythm of hammers rang out against a backdrop of shouts and mechanical whirs. Dust hung in the air, a gritty haze illuminated by the harsh midday sun. Massive steel beams balanced precariously on cranes, and a line of workers in worn-out gear toiled tirelessly under the foreman's barked orders. Aaron noticed it all: the loose planks on the scaffolding, the lack of proper fall protection on some workers, and the general air of tension that suggested exhaustion and fear. Sweat began to bead on Aaron's forehead, partly from the heat and partly from the weight of the task ahead. Though his shirt clung to his skin, his composure remained intact. This wasn't the first dangerous sight he had encountered, and he knew it wouldn't be the last. Larry Dawson, the foreman, emerged from a cluster of workers with a presence as domineering as the heat. A man in his late 50s, Larry was built like a bulldog, broad-chested with a neck so thick it seemed fused to his shoulders. His face, weathered from years of outdoor labor and a life of barking orders, was marked by deep-set wrinkles and a perpetual scowl. A cigarette dangled from his lips, though it wasn't lit, a habit he seemed to keep out of stubbornness rather than necessity. Larry's pale blue eyes narrowed the moment he spotted Aaron, and his gait shifted into an aggressive stride, as though he were a drill sergeant ready to discipline a new recruit. His voice, rough and gravelly, cut through the cacophony like a whip. "Hey you," he barked, pointing a dirt-streaked finger at Aaron. "You're late. Grab a harness and get up on the scaffolding. We're behind schedule." Aaron didn't flinch at the sudden aggression. Instead, he regarded Larry with a calm, measured gaze, taking note of the frayed harness thrust into his hands. The leather straps were cracked, the buckles rusted, and the webbing frayed at the edges, a death trap disguised as protective equipment. His sharp eyes darted to the towering scaffolding Larry had gestured toward. It swayed slightly in the breeze, a spider web of uneven planks and makeshift repairs. Aaron hesitated. He opened his mouth to explain. "Sir, I'm here for—" Larry cut him off, stepping closer, his face inches from Aaron's. "You're here to do as I say," he sneered, his voice low and venomous. "Or do you need me to explain how things work around here?" Aaron held his ground. His silence wasn't submission, it was calculation. He'd seen men like Larry before, those who ruled through intimidation, who mistook compliance for weakness. Aaron knew better than to provoke him now. Without a word, he slipped into the harness, securing the buckles with steady hands. His mind, however, was already at work, recording every detail for the report he would eventually file. The ascent was treacherous. Aaron's muscles tensed with each step as the structure groaned under his weight. Below, Larry barked orders to other workers, occasionally glancing up at Aaron with a self-satisfied smirk. The higher Aaron climbed, the more glaring the violations became. Missing guardrails, uneven supports, and improperly secured beams. He could feel the scaffold shift beneath him, its precariousness a direct result of Larry's negligence. At the top, Aaron paused, surveying the scene with sharp, calculating eyes. He knew the risks he was taking. One misstep could mean a fall, or worse. But Aaron had resolved himself to his mission long before he stepped onto this site. If it meant exposing the truth, he was willing to endure the danger. As he tightened his grip on the unstable platform, he made a silent promise. He wouldn't leave this place unchanged. Perched high on the swaying scaffolding, Aaron Mitchell felt the full weight of his precarious position. The humid air clung to his skin, and sweat trickled down his temples, not from the blazing sun, but from the nerve-wracking realization that he was standing on a disaster waiting to happen. Beneath his steel-toe boots, the planks creaked and groaned like a warning cry, the sound amplified by the faint wind that rustled through the skeletal framework of the structure. His eyes darted to a support beam just a few feet away, the source of the ominous noise. It was misaligned and poorly fastened, its bolts loose and rusted. Every subtle shift sent vibrations rippling through the entire structure. Aaron's sharp gaze swept over the site, cataloging the hazards around him. A toolbox sat precariously on the edge of the scaffolding, its contents threatening to spill onto the workers below. Nearby, electrical wires hung exposed, snaking dangerously close to where another worker operated a welding torch. Worse still, many of the workers on the ground moved about helmetless, oblivious to the risks towering above them. Aaron clenched his fists, a pang of frustration hitting him. The violations weren't just oversight, they were willful negligence. Down below, Larry Dawson stood with arms crossed, his thick boots planted firmly in the dirt as if he owned the very ground itself. His guttural voice rose above the clamor of the site, cutting through the metallic clangs and machinery hums. "These guys complain too much," he drawled, gesturing vaguely upward toward Aaron. "They just need to toughen up. Back in my day, no one cried over a few wobbly boards." Another foreman, a wiry man with a clipboard tucked under his arm, nodded uncomfortably. Larry's bravado wasn't exactly endearing, but his reputation for ruling with an iron fist kept most people from challenging him. As Aaron moved cautiously across the scaffold, he could hear snippets of Larry's loud boasting, every word grating on his nerves. Larry's casual indifference to the very real dangers was infuriating, and Aaron's heart thudded in his chest. Not from fear, but from the growing sense of responsibility. He had seen enough. He couldn't stand by while lives hung in the balance. Aaron began his descent, each step down the ladder deliberate and steady. His muscles tensed with the effort of balancing on the unsteady structure. As his boots hit solid ground, he inhaled deeply, centering himself before walking toward Larry. The foreman didn't notice him at first, too engrossed in his self-congratulatory monologue. "That's how you get a project done," Larry was saying, gesturing to the scaffolding. "No excuses, just hard work." Aaron's voice cut through the air, low but firm. "That scaffolding isn't safe." Larry turned sharply, his eyes narrowing as they locked onto Aaron. "What did you just say?" Aaron stood his ground, his posture unwavering despite the older man's glare. "I said the scaffolding isn't safe. If it collapses—" Larry's face reddened, and his jaw twitched. "Are you questioning me?" he barked, his voice rising. "You think you're some kind of expert?" "I know what I saw," Aaron replied evenly, his voice calm but resolute. His sharp eyes didn't waver, despite the venom in Larry's tone. Larry stepped closer, his boots crunching on the gravel. The stench of stale tobacco clung to him as he leaned in, his tone dropping to a menacing growl. "Listen, boy, you do what I tell you, or you can find another job." The word boy hung in the air, like a slap, but Aaron's composure didn't falter. His jaw tightened, and a flicker of controlled anger passed over his face, but he didn't react. This wasn't the time to fight. Not yet. He needed more evidence to expose the systemic negligence that went beyond Larry's temper. Without another word, Aaron stepped back, feigning compliance. He turned away, pulling his phone from his pocket, with a movement so smooth it looked like he was simply checking the time. Positioning himself subtly, he began capturing the violations in secret. A quick shot of the swaying scaffolding, a zoomed-in photo of the exposed wires, and a video of Larry barking orders at helmetless workers. His movements were deliberate but discreet, ensuring no one would suspect what he was doing. Aaron's heart pounded with purpose as he walked away from the confrontation. The evidence he was gathering would be irrefutable, a damning record of Larry's recklessness and the systemic failures of the site. This wasn't just about one man's arrogance. It was about changing a culture of disregard that put lives at risk every day. As he tucked his phone back into his pocket, Aaron's expression hardened. The stakes were higher than ever, but he was determined to see this through. 2 days later, Larry's smug confidence evaporated when an official-looking car pulled up to the site. Out stepped a team of inspectors, led by Aaron, now wearing a badge identifying him as a state official. Larry's jaw dropped as Aaron approached, flanked by 2 colleagues. "You're with them?" Larry sputtered. "You're not a worker?" "No," Aaron replied coolly. "I'm a safety inspector, and this site is in serious violation of state labor laws." The inspectors fanned out, documenting the dangerous conditions. Larry's protests grew louder and more frantic as Aaron listed the infractions. "Your scaffolding doesn't meet OSHA standards. Your equipment is outdated, and you've been coercing workers into life-threatening situations." The workers, emboldened by Aaron's presence, began speaking up. One described how Larry had threatened to dock their pay if they refused dangerous assignments. Another revealed the racial slurs Larry often hurled during his tirades. Larry's bluster turned to silence as the weight of the accusations sank in. "You don't understand," he muttered. "This is how it's always been." "Not anymore," Aaron replied, his voice steely. Weeks later, Larry faced a courtroom packed with former workers and their families. Evidence collected by Aaron painted a damning picture of years of abuse and neglect. The judge's gavel came down with finality. Larry was sentenced to prison for endangering lives and violating labor laws. Outside the courthouse, Aaron stood among the workers he had fought to protect. They shook his hand, their gratitude evident. "You didn't just save us," one said. "You gave us the courage to stand up." Aaron smiled, though his heart was heavy. He knew there were countless other sites like this one, other Larrys, wielding unchecked power. But for now, this victory was enough. As he walked away, Aaron felt the weight of his role lift slightly. He hadn't just exposed one man's bigotry and recklessness. He had sparked a reckoning that could ripple far beyond this single site.